First, I'm going to talk about how the mobile communication system started. This table shows how the cellular communication technology has been evolved from 1G to 4G, LTE. Now, let's start with the first generation system. Well, I captured this advertisement from old Korean newspaper. It was 1984. Sorry for the Korean characters. This man was the most famous actor at the time in Korea. As you can see, he is using a phone in a car, and the phone is connected to the car. So it is not perfectly wireless. We usually call it a car phone. This is the first generation wireless communication system. I'll call the first generation system as 1G from now on. G means generation. 1G was invented by AT&T Bell Labs in the early 1970s. And it was deployed in early 1980s. There were 3 different 1G systems. NMT, Nordic Mobile Telephony, was deployed in the Northern Europe region, especially the Scandinavian countries. TACS, Total Access Communication System, was deployed in England, Ireland, and Japan. AMS, its advanced mobile phone system, was deployed in the United States, South Korea, and Australia. The different systems could not communicate with each other at the time. That means NMT user cannot communicate with the AMS user. Worldwide, only 20 million people used 1G. It was less than 1% of the whole global population. Now, I will explain the key technologies used in the 1G system: cellular structure, analog FM, and FDMA. The most important development in mobile communications history is the cellular structure, cellular. As I said earlier, AT&T Bell Labs invented the cellular concept. Do you know why we use cellular? Why we just don't say wireless communication? To explain the concept of cellular, I'll give you an example. Assume that you are in Seoul now and communicating with your friend in New York with your mobile phone. Physically, actually, your phone is only connected to the nearest base station from you, not to your friend in the New York directly. If you are moving, then your phone adaptively changes the connection to the new base station on its distance from you. That means your mobile phone is always connected to the nearest base station from you, wherever you go. Your phone does not care all other base stations. So each base station has its own communication boundary, and it looks like a biological cell. That's why we call it a cellular system. Actually, you can learn more about this concept in course 3 given by Professor Sung-Yoon Kim. As a modulation technique for 1G, an analog transmission technology was used. As you know already, it is FM. Actually, we are still listening to FM radio in our cars. It is exactly the same technology. So the modulation technique was not a new one. Next, let's talk about the multiple access technique. If there is one user in a cell, then the user can access the base station anytime he wants to, without any interference. But if there are more than 2 users in a cell, there are many chances to collide each other. So we need some kinds of methods to control them. Actually, multiple access techniques are doing that. For example, as in the figure, if 3 users are in the same cell and they are using 3 different frequencies, then they can connect to the same base station without any trouble. We call this FDMA, or multiple access with frequency. Actually, this is the same as when radio broadcasting systems use different frequencies or channels. So 1G uses this FDM technology. So cellular concept, analog FM, and FDMA are the 3 key technologies of 1G. Please remember, the cellular structure is the most important concept of the wireless cellular communication system. Now, let's move on to the drawbacks of 1G. 1G was the first mobile communication system. That's it. It had many problems. First, the cell phones were too big and heavy. They were actually bigger than a brick. And it was difficult to use a mobile phone with a small battery due to poor battery performance. For this reason, at that time, the phone was mostly used in cars. So we called it a car phone rather than a cell phone. And the voice quality was very, very poor. Calls were frequently dropped. At times, you could not hear the voice clearly because of the noise. And it is very difficult to cancel out the noise in the analog systems. And there was no security function at all. That is, other users could easily hear your conversation and easily interrupt you. And finally, and most importantly, it was very, very expensive to buy a phone. And the service fee was also very expensive. That's why less than 1% of people used it. These are the problems of 1G system. Actually, 1G is not a good system, but with the cellular concept, mankind started to use a mobile communication system. So most important word of 1G is a cellular. And it used analog technology, and it was designed to send only voice. So you could not use your SMS, video call. Clearly, we need an advanced system. That forced the people to develop the 2G wireless system. Okay, let's move on to the 2G system. The 2G system started in the mid-1990s. The key word with 2G is digital. For 2G, I'll talk about when and how they were deployed, which technologies in uses, and finally, what kind of services you could use. 2G systems were deployed in the 1990s. Actually, there were 4 different 2G systems worldwide. In total, 700 million people used 2G. Among them, 71% used the GSM, global standard, it is. And 12% used the CDMA system. GSM users can communicate with the CDMA user, let's reminding 1G. They could not communicate each other if they are using different system with 1G system. So the key technologies in 2G is digital transmission and new multiple access techniques, TDMA and CDMA. As I mentioned earlier, 2G was the first digital transmission system in mobile communication history. By using digital modulation and channel coding, we can reduce the noise a lot. So the voice communication quality was dramatically improved compared to 1G. 2G systems were using BPSK and QPSK as the modulation technique. Using BPSK, we can send 1 bit per symbol. And in QPSK, you can send 2 bits per symbol. These were not new technology at the time, but as they were already being used in satellite and military communication. But applying these techniques to mobile communication systems was a fantastic job. Actually, you can learn more about these modulation techniques in course 2 given by Professor Kwang-soon Kim. Now, let's move on to the multiple access technique. You have already learned that 1G uses FDMA, frequency division multiple access. In 2G, we are now using TDMA or CDMA. With TDMA, users use different time slots. And with CDMA, users use different codes to access a base station in order to avoid colliding. This will be also explained in course 2 in more detail. Thanks to the digital transmission technique, people were able to transmit data rather than just to make a voice call. So they started to use the short message service we call SMS. The data rate of 2G was up to 64 kilobps. 1 bps means you can send 1 bit in 1 second. So 64 kilobps means you can send 64 kilobits in 1 second. However, the data rate with 2G was still very limited. For example, it took more than 1 hour to download an 800 megabyte CD. With this data rate, you cannot use web surfing or video call. For web surfing and video calling, you need at least 1 megabyte per sec. This is the main drawback of 2G, low data rate. Now, let's compare 1G and 2G. As I already mentioned, the number of subscribers increased from 20 million to 700 million, more than 22 times. Explosive. One reason is the price. The phone price is much cheaper than 1G, and the communication fees too. And the transmission technology changed from analog to digital. Remember, this is the most important change of 2G. This is a revolution. And people started to use SMS. But the data rate is still limited. You still cannot use multimedia message services or do video calling. So we need a more advanced system. Okay, here is the summary table comparing 1G and 2G. And now let's move on to the 3G.